Nova lay weak on the hospital bed, her body trembling, but her eyes filled with tears of joy as the nurse placed a tiny baby girl in her arms. "Zola," she whispered, smiling despite the pain. Her heart swelled with love as she held her daughter close, already imagining a bright future. But that joy shattered the moment Elio walked into the room. He stared at the baby, his face twisted in disgust. "A girl?" he snapped, his voice sharp like a knife. "This is what you give me?" Nova's smile faded instantly. She had hoped, just maybe, he would be happy, but she was wrong. From that day, Elio's coldness turned into something much darker. At first it was silence, ignoring both Nova and the baby. Then it became insults, cruel words thrown like stones every time he saw Zola. And then the beatings began. Small slaps became punches, kicks, bruises that Nova hid with long clothes and fake smiles, all because she had given birth to a girl, not the son he believed he deserved. Nova was torn. The village had always taught her that a good wife endures, that a woman's worth came from bearing sons. But when she looked into Zola's eyes, she saw hope. She saw light. She saw a future that deserved to shine. She wanted to leave, to run, but fear chained her in place. Fear of what people would say, fear of where she would go, fear of what Elio might do. Still, she held Zola tighter every night, whispering promises into her ears, promises of love, of protection, of a better life, even if Nova didn't yet know how to give it. But deep down, something was changing inside her, something fierce, something strong, something ready to fight back. Every day in Nova's home felt like walking on broken glass. Elio had become a monster behind closed doors. His voice was loud, his hands heavy, and his heart full of bitterness. The smallest things would set him off: a cold meal, Zola crying at night, Nova looking too tired. Each slap, each cruel word made Nova feel smaller, like her soul was slowly being crushed. But no one outside their home knew. To the world, Elio was a hard-working man. Only Nova knew the truth. The man who had once held her hand at their wedding now used those same hands to break her spirit. Nova kept quiet, not because she didn't want to speak, but because she didn't know who would listen. In their village, people believed that a woman's duty was to stay no matter what. "It's your cross," they would say. "Endure it, for your family's name." But Nova's heart was breaking every day, and the only reason she held on was Zola. That little girl's smile was like sunlight in the middle of a storm. Nova would stay up at night just watching her sleep, brushing her tiny curls, whispering softly, "I'm sorry you have to grow up in this." Then came Amani. She was Nova's old friend, bold and kind, who had returned to the village after many years. One afternoon, Amani noticed the bruises on Nova's arm and didn't pretend not to see. She sat her down and asked, "How long has this been happening?" At first, Nova denied it. But when Amani hugged her, Nova broke down. The tears, the pain, the fear, all came pouring out. Amani didn't judge her. Instead, she held her tightly and said, "You don't deserve this, Nova. You and Zola deserve peace, love, safety." Nova wanted to believe it. She wanted to run, but something always pulled her back. Fear, shame, hope that Elio would change. But deep down, Nova knew better. Elio wasn't changing. He was getting worse. Still, she endured, not for herself, but for Zola. Every day, she woke up and wore a smile like armor. She learned how to hide the bruises, how to cook perfectly to avoid his rage, how to stay quiet when she wanted to scream. She didn't have a plan yet, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let Elio destroy her daughter's spirit the way he was trying to destroy hers. So, she stayed. But her heart was no longer scared. It was getting stronger, little by little. Every time Zola laughed, it reminded Nova why she had to survive. And with Amani quietly watching her back, offering support whenever she could, Nova started to believe that one day, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day she would break free, not just for herself, but for the little girl who deserved a life without fear. From the moment Zola could walk, it was clear she was different. While most children in their village played and giggled, Zola's eyes were always focused on something more: books, questions, the world beyond. Nova would catch her daughter sitting in the corner, flipping through pages of old, tattered textbooks that didn't belong to her. dreaming of a future far beyond the limits of their small, struggling village. Nova didn't have much to offer, but she promised herself that she would give Zola everything: encouragement, love, and the belief that she could be more than what her father expected. At school, Zola was a star. Teachers noticed the way her mind worked, the way she grasped concepts so quickly that it seemed like she wasn't even trying. She finished assignments early, asked deep questions, and always volunteered to help others. Her classmates loved her, admired her, but the love that Zola needed most, the approval of her father, was nowhere to be found. Elio, still fixated on the idea that a son was the only thing that could make him proud, barely acknowledged his daughter's achievements. When he saw Zola's trophies or heard about her high marks, his face remained stone cold. A girl could never be enough, but Zola was undeterred. She didn't care about his indifference. Instead, she soaked up every ounce of encouragement from her teachers and peers. Mrs. Kofi, her favorite teacher, would tell her, "You have the mind of a leader, Zola. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The other children in the village noticed Zola's natural leadership, and they began to see her as someone who could change things. Even the elders started talking about her, her brilliance, her potential. "One day, that girl will go far," they would say, though most didn't know how far. Zola's dreams were so big, they couldn't even imagine them. Nova watched her daughter from a distance, her heart full of pride. She knew what Zola was capable of. She saw the fire in her daughter's eyes when Zola talked about her future, a future that was bright and full of possibility. It was painful for Nova to think that Elio, the man she had once loved, couldn't see what a treasure he had in his daughter. But Zola didn't need his approval. She didn't need Elio's validation. She had something stronger. She had herself. She had her dreams, her intelligence, and the belief that she could create a life far better than the one Elio had tried to force upon her. Zola kept going, undistracted by the toxic environment at home. Each day, she worked harder, studied longer, and pushed herself further. Elio's silence became less painful as Zola found her own voice. She was determined to prove, not just to her father, but to herself, that she was worthy of respect, of success, and of a future she could control. And as she grew, her potential blossomed, more radiant and undeniable with each passing day. One night, everything changed. Nova had endured years of Elio's cruelty, his physical abuse, his words that cut like knives, his neglect. But this time, it went too far. It wasn't just the punches or the insults. It was the terrifying look in Elio's eyes that night, when he grabbed her by the throat, choking the very life out of her as Zola screamed from the other room. Nova had never felt so helpless. She thought, "This is it. This is where it ends." Her world had come crashing down, but this time, something inside her shifted. She was done being afraid, done being silent. She couldn't let Zola grow up seeing this. She wouldn't let her daughter think that this kind of treatment was normal. For the first time in years, Nova felt the strength to fight back, not physically, but emotionally. As Elio stormed out of the house, drunk and furious, she collapsed onto the floor. It wasn't fear that consumed her anymore. It was a deep, burning resolve. Zola was everything, and she deserved so much more than the life Nova had been living. Nova wasn't going to let her daughter live through the same darkness she had. That night, she called Amani. Her voice trembled, but the decision was final. "I'm leaving, Amani. I can't do this anymore. I won't let him destroy us." Amani's voice was steady on the other end. "You're not alone, Nova. You and Zola, you're going to be free." Amani had seen the abuse, known the pain, and had always urged Nova to leave. But now, with the spark of courage that had ignited in her, Nova felt ready. The next morning, under the cover of darkness, Amani helped Nova pack her things. With Zola holding her mother's hand tightly, they fled to the nearby city, leaving behind the house that had been their prison. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. The thought of starting over in a new place was scary, but Nova's heart beat with a fierce hope that hadn't been there for years. For the first time in so long, she could breathe. Once they settled into a small apartment, Nova didn't waste any time. She filed for divorce and sought legal protection. She didn't care about the years she had wasted with Elio anymore. All that mattered was her future and Zola's. The court process was terrifying, and the weight of everything made Nova feel small again. But she knew that if she didn't do this now, she would regret it forever. With Amani's support and the help of a lawyer, Nova fought back. For the first time, Elio wasn't the one in control. The fear he had instilled in her was slowly being replaced by a newfound strength, and she wasn't going to stop until she had the life she and Zola deserved. The process was long, and Elio fought back hard, but Nova's resolve never wavered. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her daughter's future, a future filled with love, safety, and freedom. She would never let Zola see her mother broken again. This was just the beginning of their new life. After leaving Elio and the toxic life she had known for so long, Nova was determined to rebuild everything from scratch. Every day felt like a battle, but Nova was fueled by a newfound strength she never knew she had. She woke up early, worked late into the night, and did whatever it took to ensure that Zola would never feel the pain of her past. Nova found a steady job at a local cafe, and while it wasn't glamorous, it paid the bills. The long hours were exhausting, but she didn't mind. As long as it meant providing for Zola, it was worth it. With every paycheck, Nova felt a little bit freer, and every little accomplishment built her confidence. She refused to let her past define her future. She wanted more than just survival. She wanted success. She wanted Zola to see what strength and perseverance could achieve. And Zola, with her bright eyes and fierce ambition, was the perfect inspiration. In the evenings, Nova joined support groups for women who had been through the same kind of abuse. At first, she felt hesitant to share her story, unsure if anyone would understand the depth of her pain. But as the weeks passed, she found comfort in the stories of other women who had walked similar paths. Their courage lit a fire in her. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. These women were fighters, and Nova knew she could be one too. Soon, she began speaking out at meetings, sharing her story, and encouraging others to break free from their abusive situations. But it wasn't just the women in the support groups who saw Nova's strength. Zola, too, was watching. Despite the pain they had been through, Zola continued to thrive academically. She was smart, driven, and determined to prove that she was more than what her father had ever believed she could be. Her teachers were amazed by her intelligence and her relentless work ethic. They pushed her to apply for scholarships, and soon Zola was being recognized by some of the most prestigious schools. When she received her first scholarship offer, Nova cried tears of joy. This was the life she had dreamed of for Zola, one of opportunity and success, free from the chains of abuse. Zola's achievements became a reflection of her mother's hard work and sacrifice. The once quiet girl, who had spent years hiding in the shadows of Elio's cruelty, now stood tall, her confidence growing with every step. Nova knew that Zola's future was bright, and she was determined to give her the tools to build it. Zola's success wasn't just about her academic brilliance. It was about the strength of the bond between mother and daughter, the resilience they had both shown, and the love that now filled their home. Every achievement Zola unlocked was a victory for both of them, a reminder that no matter how dark things had gotten, they could rise again, stronger than ever. Nova's life was no longer about survival. It was about empowerment, and she would never stop fighting for herself or for Zola's future. Zola's journey from a quiet, often overlooked girl to a powerful voice for change was nothing short of inspiring. She had always been determined to make something of herself, but as she grew older, the weight of her past began to fuel her passion. When Zola was accepted into one of the most prestigious universities in the country, it felt like a dream come true for both her and Nova. It was the first sign that all their struggles were not in vain. Zola didn't just see this as a chance for personal success. She knew it was her opportunity to create change, to stand up for the women who had suffered as her mother had. Studying law wasn't just about the degree for Zola. It was her weapon. She wanted to fight for those who didn't have a voice, just like her mother had fought for her. With every class, every lecture, Zola's passion grew stronger. She dove deep into her studies, using every resource to understand the legal system, not just as a student, but as a future advocate for the rights of women. The more she learned, the more determined she became to help others who had faced abuse, discrimination, and inequality. But Zola didn't stop at just being a top student. She became an outspoken advocate for women's rights on campus. challenging sexist norms, and fighting for equality wherever she could. She started speaking at rallies, leading discussions, and using her voice to raise awareness about domestic abuse, women's empowerment, and gender equality. Zola's speeches were not just impactful, they were raw, emotional, and deeply personal. Her experiences and her mother's courage became the backbone of her advocacy. Soon, her activism began to catch the attention of not just her university, but media outlets as well. Local news stations, blogs, and even national newspapers started covering her story. They couldn't get enough of Zola's strength, her journey, and her powerful message. People were moved by her determination, her intelligence, and the way she used her own painful history to fuel a bigger cause. Zola wasn't just a student anymore. She was a symbol of hope, change, and resilience. The media buzz didn't stop at her academic achievements. Zola's efforts to create a platform for women's voices earned her recognition far beyond the university. She was invited to speak at conferences, interviewed by journalists, and even featured in documentaries that highlighted the struggles and triumphs of women who had survived abuse. Her story was no longer just about escaping the shadows of her past. It was about transforming that pain into a force for good. As Zola's fame grew, so did her resolve. She knew she had a long way to go, but she had already achieved so much. Every article written about her, every interview, was another step toward creating the world she dreamed of, a world where women didn't have to suffer in silence. With her eyes set on the future, Zola was more than ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. Her rise to prominence wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for all the women whose voices had been silenced for too long. As Zola's success continued to grow, her story spread far and wide, catching the attention of many, including the one person who had tried to break her, Elio. He had always been the one who crushed Zola's dreams, the one who punished Nova for not giving him the son he wanted. But now, Elio was a shadow of the man he once was. His actions had led to his downfall, and he was ostracized by the community. No longer the man of power, he now lived with the shame of his past. One day, as Elio scrolled through the news, his eyes landed on an article about Zola. The headline caught his breath. Zola Okafor, law student, women's rights advocate, and the voice of change. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe it. Zola, the girl he had beaten and dismissed, was now a beacon of hope, and she was everything he had never wanted her to be. Her achievements, her courage, and the life she was building in spite of him made Elio realize just how far he had fallen. The regret flooded him. He wished he had been a better father, a better husband, but it was too late. Determined to fix what he had broken, Elio decided to try and reconnect. He called Nova, sent letters, and even reached out to Zola through the media, begging for forgiveness. He claimed to have changed, to have learned from his mistakes, but deep down, he knew he could never erase the damage he had done. He hoped, foolishly, that somehow the two women he had hurt so badly would open their hearts to him again. But Nova and Zola were no longer the same people they had been all those years ago. Nova had fought for so long to escape Elio's grip, and Zola had worked tirelessly to rise above the abuse and build a future. They had found peace, strength, and love in themselves. Elio's apologies, no matter how sincere, couldn't change the fact that he had once tried to destroy them. They were no longer the women he could manipulate or control. As they faced the decision of whether to confront their past abuser, the emotions were mixed. Part of Nova wanted to move on, to never face Elio again. He had already taken so much from her. But there was also a part of her that knew this was a chance to finally close that painful chapter of her life. Zola, on the other hand, struggled with the idea of confronting the man who had been her tormentor. Her mother had endured so much, and now Zola was thriving. Did they really need to go back to that pain? The emotional dilemma was real, but the truth was, neither Nova nor Zola needed Elio to find their peace. The healing had already happened, and confronting him would only be for their closure, not for his redemption. Both knew that their future was not tied to the man who had tried to break them. They had already built something stronger, something far more lasting. Zola stood on the stage, her voice steady but full of emotion. The room was silent as she told her story, her childhood filled with fear, The screams she remembered, the bruises her mother hid, and the pain of being unwanted just because she was born a girl. She spoke about the night her mother nearly lost her life and the strength it took for them to run. As she spoke, people in the crowd cried, others nodded, seeing their own pain in her words. Zola didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for every woman who had suffered in silence, every child who had been treated as less, and every family broken by abuse. She talked about her mother, Nova, and how she had worked day and night to give Zola a chance at life. She spoke of Amani, who had been their only light in the darkness. But most importantly, Zola explained that abuse is not just personal, it's a community issue, and silence makes it worse. Her speech was recorded, shared, and soon it spread everywhere. On TV, on social media, in newspapers. Zola's voice became impossible to ignore, and with her voice came truth. People began to ask questions. Who was Elio? What had he done? Soon more stories surfaced. Others who had been abused, women who had suffered in similar silence. Elio, once proud and respected, was now seen for who he really was. The truth came out. He was arrested and charged for the abuse he had inflicted on Nova, and other women came forward too. There was no hiding anymore. His past had caught up with him. The community, once silent, began to change. Leaders spoke out. Schools started programs to educate children about respect and equality, and support centers were set up for abused women and children. Cultural beliefs that had once valued boys over girls were questioned. People began to understand that every child, no matter the gender, is a gift. Nova, who had once been mocked and blamed, was now seen as a symbol of strength. She and Zola were no longer victims. They were heroes. Zola's story sparked a movement. More women began to speak up. More men began to listen. And a new generation started to believe that love should never hurt and respect should be for all. What started as pain in a small home had now turned into power across the nation. Zola didn't just share her story to punish Elio. She shared it to change lives. And she did, forever. Nova and Zola finally began to breathe freely. After years of pain and struggle, they started the journey of healing. They joined a therapy group where other women shared their stories too. At first, Nova found it hard to speak, but with time, she opened up. She cried, she laughed, and she slowly began to let go of the hurt. Zola too found comfort in knowing they weren't alone. The support from the group gave them strength they never knew they had. For the first time, they weren't just surviving, they were healing. Together, Nova and Zola decided they wanted to do more. They wanted to help other women and children who had gone through the same kind of pain. So, they used what little savings they had, and, with help from kind supporters, they started a foundation. It was called Zola Light, a name chosen to remind others that even in darkness, light can be born. The foundation provided shelter, counseling, and legal help for victims of domestic violence. Women came to them scared, broken, and unsure, just like Nova once was, but they left stronger, hopeful, and free. Zola gave talks in schools, churches, and community centers. She taught people how to see the signs of abuse and how to speak up. Nova shared her story with quiet strength, showing that even the most painful past could be a source of power. The foundation grew, and soon people across the country were talking about it. Many lives were saved, many tears were wiped, and many women found courage because of Nova and Zola. Meanwhile, Elio sat alone in a small room. No respect, no family, no friends, just silence and his own thoughts. He had lost everything, and now he had all the time in the world to remember what he had done. He watched Zola's interviews on TV, saw Nova's face on posters for the foundation, and felt the weight of his mistakes crush him. Regret burned in his heart, but it was too late. The people he once hurt had found happiness without him. They had grown, healed, and built a life far away from his shadow. Zola and Nova didn't hate him anymore. They didn't waste energy on anger. They had already won by choosing peace. The pain he caused had turned into something powerful. Their story was now one of victory, not sorrow. And while Elio sat with his regrets, they walked in the light, free and fearless. In the end, Nova and Zola found something stronger than revenge. They found healing, love, and purpose. And with every woman they helped, every life they changed, they knew they had turned their wounds into wings. Nova and Zola stood tall, side by side, as the sun rose on a new chapter of their lives. They were no longer the broken women from the past. They were warriors, survivors, and leaders. With each step they took, they brought light into the lives of others. Nova, once silenced by fear, now spoke boldly to crowds. She shared her pain, her survival, and her strength. Her voice carried power, touching hearts and opening eyes. Zola, now a successful lawyer and activist, worked day and night to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been silenced. Their story began to spread far and wide. People in villages, towns, and cities listened. Young girls found courage in Zola's words. Mothers found strength in Nova's journey. Even fathers and brothers began to rethink old ways. Slowly, the society around them started to change. Laws were improved to protect women and children. Schools began to teach respect and equality. Community leaders started having open conversations about domestic violence. The silence that once protected abusers was being shattered, and in its place, a new voice was rising, a voice of justice. The foundation they built, Zola Light, grew beyond what they imagined. It became a symbol of hope. Survivors came there not just for help, but to heal, to learn, and to rise. Nova and Zola made sure no one felt alone the way they once did. Every life they touched reminded them why they kept going. Every smile they saw gave them more strength. Despite everything they had been through, they never let bitterness live in their hearts. They chose love. They chose purpose. They chose to become the very heroes they needed when they were struggling. And in doing so, they lit the path for many others. In the end, their lives were not defined by the pain they endured, but by the light they became. Their story became more than just a tale of survival. It was a movement, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, a new dawn will always come. A dawn filled with hope, strength, and the unshakable power of women who refused to stay silent. Nova and Zola proved to the world that even the deepest wounds could become the strongest wing. They turned their pain into purpose, and they reminded everyone watching that justice is possible, healing is real, and when women rise, the world changes.